Good morning, everyone. I'm Arthur DuCote, the chairman of the Montgomery Chamber, and we'd like to welcome you to our very first virtual Eggs and Issues. We're looking forward to a really great meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got it right at 300 people that are joining us today, just about the same that we have when we're in person, and we couldn't be happier and more thrilled. We've got a very special guest today. Congressman Mike Rogers is going to join us, and we're looking very forward to hearing from him. He'll make some prepared comments. We've actually had you, our audience, submit questions. We'll have an opportunity to ask him those questions, give him a chance to respond. And so we've got a very good program planned for you, and we're looking forward to delivering it to you. Before we get started, though, I would like to thank our sponsors. Our grand presenting sponsor is Balch and Bingham. Our silver sponsors, Alabama Municipal Electric Authority, Montgomery Area Association of Realtors, Power South Energy. I'd like to thank all of our corporate sponsors also. You'll see those scrolling at the bottom of your screen. We could not do this without our sponsors. It would not happen. And I want to thank all of you for being a terrific supporter of the Montgomery Chamber and our entire business community, and for agreeing to sponsor this event today. So thank you very much. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our Congressman Mike Rogers. I'm going to go through a list here of introductions, so give me a moment to do that. Mike, then I'll turn it over to you. Congressman Rogers has served Alabama's 3rd Congressional District since first elected in 2002. He currently serves as the ranking member of the House Committee on Homeland Security and is a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee. As ranking member on the Committee of Homeland Security, Congressman Rogers serves as the top Republican on the full committee. Boasting a strong record on defending the vital issues important to America's national security and Alabama's economy, Congressman Rogers is uniquely positioned to protect and grow our defense community here in the River Region and across the state of Alabama. As many of you know, Congressman Rogers was previously scheduled during our first planned Eggs and Issues, but the environment threw us a curveball, and as Mike does so well, he can hit a curveball. He agreed to come back and do this for us virtual, so thank you again, Mike. We all know very little has been normal about 2020, and we've watched Congress has played a critical role in navigating the COVID-19 response while still working to keep the country running and looking forward to the future. I know we are all pleased to have Congressman Rogers fighting for the critical issues that impact Montgomery, and look forward to hearing from him today. It is my honor to welcome and introduce Congressman Mike Rogers to you this morning. Congressman, thank you again for being here. We're looking so forward to hearing from you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all once again having me. It's a real honor to be with you. It's a real honor to be your congressman. It's hard to believe it's been 18 years since y'all first elected me, and I really enjoyed representing Montgomery River Region, and especially enjoyed working with your chamber. This is as well run a chamber as I've ever interacted with anywhere. Just the fact that y'all can put something like this together on a regular basis is very impressive, not to mention all the other great things that y'all do to advocate for the business community in that area. I thought I'd talk about several things this morning, and happy to take your questions after that. Obviously, this is a very unusual time in a host of ways for us, but we need to be getting back to work. You know, that's one of the things that I'm real frustrated about with this process. You know, understandably, in the first couple of months, while we grappled with how to safely move through this pandemic, we stayed away from DC. But then we had some packages that had to be passed, some things that had to be done. And starting around late May, the Senate started going back, and the House was not being called back, and Speaker Pelosi just kept saying it just wasn't safe. But the Senate's proven that they can do it safely, and we've been called back now about 5 times for different packages that we had to work on, whether in committee or on the floor, and we've demonstrated that we can do it safely. So we need to be back too. If Walmart workers and manufacturers are considered essential, I don't know why the Congress is not considered essential. The executive branch is back working full time. When you go up there, and y'all wouldn't be able to get in, but only members and very few staff, mainly cleaning people, are allowed in the office buildings or the Capitol, and security, obviously. So it's as clean a place as you'll be. Nobody's going to catch the virus in any one of those office buildings or in the Capitol. When we do go to vote, we're brought in just a few members at a time. Everything is cleaned after every member comes through. It's just very safe. And so we need to be back up there doing the people's business. And I'm frustrated that we're not. When we left at the end of July, as you know, the CARES Act and some of the components of it expired at the end of July, like the unemployment benefit. We were given a schedule that we were only going to be coming back in mid-September for 3 weeks and then out for another 6 to 7 weeks. So you look at basically a 13-week period, and we're only in session for 3 of those. That's just indefensible, and given the important things we need to be doing. For example, one of the things that we're going to be called in this weekend for a special vote is Speaker Pelosi wants us to give $25 billion to the Postal Service. This is because she wants to see universal mail-in balloting. Well, first of all, the Postal Service hadn't spent the $10 billion we gave them in the CARES Act yet. They hadn't spent any of it. So I don't know why we'd be rushing to give them even more money. And I don't know where $25 billion came from, because we haven't had any hearings on this. We have no testimony. We don't know what the needs are. It's insane. But this is about messaging to the base. The second thing on that point is the Congress, the federal government doesn't get to run elections. We don't get to tell people they're going to be mail-in ballots. The Constitution leaves that power to the states. So I know she wants universal mail-in balloting, but she's not going to get it. And the fact is, they're going to pass this bill out of the House because they've got the majority, but the Senate's not going to take it up. So it's going to be just a wasted exercise when there are a lot of things we could be working on that we can agree on. First of all, we have a lot of things that we can agree on about helping the economy through the rest of this pandemic until we get a vaccine, but that's not what they're wanting to talk about. You know, there's been a real impasse between the Democrat-controlled House and the Republican-controlled Senate, and that Speaker Pelosi wants us to borrow another $3.4 trillion for the next version of the CARES Act. And the Senate has made it clear, we've already borrowed $4 trillion. We're not going to spend more than another trillion under any circumstances. And that's what's driving me nuts the most, is nobody's thinking about how much money we've borrowed. And we already had an immense debt going into this. Now, granted, I'm not complaining about what we've borrowed so far and dispersed, because we weren't going to have an economy to resurrect after this pandemic if we didn't save it with a lot of the extraordinary. But you just can't keep spending like a drunken sailor and think there's not going to be some consequences, because right now, interest rates are dirt cheap. Once they start ticking back up, the service on this debt is going to eat away at our ability to fund things like education, transportation, and the military. As I've told y'all before, when you look at the federal spending, it's like a pie with 3 parts, almost equal parts. 1/3 Medicare, Medicaid, 1/3 Social Security, and 1/3 is everything else. Those first 2 I described are what we call entitlement spending. They're not affected. If we have to start taking money out of HIDE, it comes out of the 1/3 of everything else. And defense is, of course, what I care most about, and I focus most about. I know y'all care a lot about it, given your defense presence there in your community. So you can't just ignore that, but we're not even talking about it. And one of the reasons we're not talking about it, we're not in session. So you'll hear me continue to beat the drum. We've been beating the drum that we need to be back in town, trying to do some things to give relief to American people. Something else we can agree on is, and this is bipartisan, and it's around the world. It's not just us. The world found out how dependent they were on China for a lot of manufactured goods when this pandemic hit. The most obvious were PPE. Almost all of it is manufactured in China, but also pharmaceuticals. I don't think most people realized how much we depended on China for pharmaceuticals, not just the final drugs, but many of the components that go into the manufacture of drugs. So there's a strong sense that we need to, as a federal government, to incentivize economically the repatriation of manufacturing in this country. away from China. And the Europeans are of the exact same mind, the Asians. So, we need to get back to Washington so we can start doing that. We don't need to be caught in this situation again. And those are things we can agree on. As you heard in the introduction, I'm the top Republican on the Homeland Security Committee. We need to be having more focus on these riots that are taking place around the country and what we need to do to calm that down. This is unacceptable what you're seeing on TV. These are not protests. These are anarchists. These are terrorists. These are riots. People that are taking advantage of the discontent right now in the country to go out and just loot. And you just can't let that continue to go on, because that could start to metastasize if we don't get a hold of it. I'm pretty excited that we're real close to having a vaccine that we can start producing. When this first started in February, we were told by the CDC that they had already started working on a vaccine, and that if everything went right, best case scenario, it would be ready for manufacturing distribution by the first of the year. Typically, it takes 2 years to do this, and they're not cutting any corners. We've just gotten the red tape out of the process. There is no bureaucracy. They've been going from phase 1 to phase 2. Now they're in phase 3. We have 3 different manufacturers that have a drug that does deal with the virus. What they're doing now is to make sure it doesn't make you grow a third ear or go blind or have some other side effect. But we know that the vaccines work. The great news is they're ahead of schedule. And while, as y'all know, I focus on national security issues, my buddies on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over the vaccines, tell me that they could go to manufacture as early as October. And we've already paid the manufacturers to produce billions of these once the green light is given by the FDA that they're safe. So hopefully we're going to get that vaccine before the end of the year out to folks, along with some therapeutics, and that will be the big issue to get us back to some sense of normalcy in our communities. But I don't think any of us really know what the economic impact to the country is going to be, and probably won't for another year. As we come out of this pandemic with a vaccine and we try to resurrect our economy, to see who can be brought back and who can't. For example, I don't think half the airlines will come back after this, and that's unfortunate, but I think it's a reality. I don't know how long it's going to take for hotels and restaurants to be able to come back, and I don't know that they will, particularly the hotels. So I think the workplace is going to look a lot different. A lot of us have found in this process that a lot of our employees can work just as productively from home, and that I think that's going to be the case. That some of the employers are going to realize they don't have to have as big an office footprint as they've had in the past. I know at the Pentagon, because again, I focus mostly on national security, we've been shocked to find out that their productivity has improved as members have worked from home and not been driving in to work at the Pentagon or driving back. So I think that you're going to see the workplace look a lot different in the future. One of the things y'all are ahead of the rest of the state on, but the rest of my district's going to have to work on, is we've got to get broadband technology in more communities than we have now because of this very factor. If we're going to have kids working more from home and other folks, then we're going to have the infrastructure to support that new model, and we don't have it at present. The DC right now is very poisonous. It's been bad for a while, but part of it's supposed to be that way. That's just the nature of the legislative world. But as we get closer to this November election, it's just awful. The other side wants to see Donald Trump beat more than life itself, and unfortunately, that's driving a lot of decisions. I personally believe that's why we're not being called back into session. There's a belief that the more chaotic the nation is economically and otherwise between now and November, the more it helps the Democrat Party take Trump out, and that's all they care about. I think it's despicable that we aren't back working just for political reasons, because people are hurting, people are afraid. we can do some things. We've already demonstrated that with the PPP program that can be very beneficial to helping companies survive. The unemployment benefit, while I was very upset that the federal government was giving $600 in addition to the state's unemployment benefit, I wanted them to get something, just not $600, because many of you know this, some of you don't. Alabama provides a $275 a week unemployment benefit. When you put the federal government $600 on top of that, that's $875 a week, or almost $22 an hour, $21.86, I think is what it is, $45,500 a year. That's a good income in Alabama. Now, if you live in Chicago or New York, maybe they need $600 in addition to what the state does, but not in Alabama. Because I have a lot of manufacturers that are paying $12 to $15 an hour. And if their employees are being told, I'll give you 22 to stay home, they're going to stay home. And that's what's happened. And it's even worse in the service industry. If you're working at a grocery store making $10 an hour and the government says, I'll pay you 22 to stay home, you stay home. Restaurants, same thing. So it's been it really hamstrung us in trying to open the economy back up when we had federal policies in place that were working against us. Now, what we wanted in the next version, but I mean the Republicans wanted in the next version of the CARES Act, was to make it a $200 supplement, with the understanding that in certain urban areas with certain cost of living, it could be more. Speaker Pelosi not only wanted to keep it at 600, she wanted it to stay at 600 through 2021. Now think about that. We're trying to get the economy back up. We're virtually certain we're going to have a vaccine in the very near future and try to reopen the economy. And she's wanting us to basically incentivize people not to go back to work. And, some people say, well, if your job is available, you're no longer qualified for unemployment. That's true, unless you say, I'm worried about getting the virus. And then all of a sudden that waived. And that's what was happening. There's a lot of people just say, I'm just worried about getting the virus, I'm going to stay home. So that's a big problem that we've had in trying to get another stimulus bill. But the things that are really driving us nuts is things like, again, the Speaker wants $3.4 trillion. Part of that's for the Green New Deal that she threw into this CARES Act, the fourth version. That's got nothing to do with the virus. She wants us to bail out the pension funds of some major cities' pensions that are in trouble. That has nothing to do with the pandemic. I'm not going to be okay with borrowing money to help New York City's pension fund just because they've been irresponsible and they think this is their chance to get some relief from the federal government. The federal government needs some relief as far as I'm concerned. We've got ourselves in a big enough hole. One of the last things I'll mention, well, a couple of things. One, I want to talk about the census. I do hope that everybody has a full appreciation of how important the census is. The last census, we had the same problem. We were on the verge of maybe losing a seat. And that's not because we aren't growing. We just aren't growing as fast as some other states. But then Katrina hit, and that pushed a lot of people up in Alabama that saved. They weren't going back to New Orleans. Well, that saved us last time. This time, I'm hoping we don't have a hurricane, but we need something to save us because we have the same problem. Other states are growing faster than us, particularly those states that have a lot of illegals coming in: Arizona, Texas, Nevada, California. So if we lose a seat, it's going to be to one of them. The Supreme Court has decided that illegals are to be counted just like citizens, which I disagree with, but that's the system we have. So we have to have about 72, 73% participation in the census in order to stay okay and keep 7 seats. If we have less than that, we're going to lose a seat. Our problem is right now we're in the 50 some odd % level. If that stays the case, we're going to lose 2 congressional seats. There's a lot of money that comes with each congressional seat. That's how they distribute resources around the country. And the fact is, it's the people that are poorest among us and least educated that benefit from those very federal programs, but they're the ones that are most afraid to participate in the census. So I hope all of you will use your circle of influence to urge people to participate in the census and us try to get a good count. If we get a reasonable count, we're going to be fine. But if not, then it's going to be very different for the next decade in the way we get resources from the federal government. The last thing I'll mention is parochial. As you heard in the introduction, I have the privilege of serving as a top Republican on the Homeland Security Committee right now. Currently, the top Republican on the Armed Services Committee is retiring, and I'm competing with a member from Ohio to take that seat. If we're lucky in November, and I think we will be, and President Trump's reelected and we get the majority back in the House, that'll make me chairman of the Armed Services Committee. And I think that would be good for everybody on this call right now. I'm very focused on making sure we rebuild our military and have us in a position to keep us safe and secure as we go into the next decades. While Russia has been our peer competitor we've had to be more concerned with in recent years, China is the future, and they are getting after it. And if we don't start restructuring and getting after it, we're going to wish we had. But right now it's looking pretty good. If I don't screw it up, hopefully I'll be in that position in the next Congress. With that, I'll yield and take questions if you got them.
Congressman Rogers, thank you so much for your comments. We appreciate it greatly. We appreciate your strong and steady leadership. There's not a more important time that our country and our state needs it. So thank you very much for that. We do have a few questions. I'd like to start with the first one. Our first question touches on the upcoming 2020 election season. We know there will be at least some changes to the makeup of both the Alabama congressional delegation as well as the potential makeup of the House and Senate. And then we also have a high-stakes presidential election. In your opinion, what are the implications of such a change, both regionally and to our country, as we continue to work through the challenges that we have?
It's a great question. The biggest thing, and everybody on this call I think already knows this, Senator Shelby says he's going to retire after this term. He is an enormously powerful member of Congress, has been for a long time, but now as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, even more so. That's going to hit the state seriously if, in fact, he does leave at the end of this term. I hope he doesn't, but he says he is. But more importantly, that means that whoever wins this November's election in 2 years could become the senior senator from Alabama. That's significant change. So this election is going to be important in November. I think that, Alabama is a blood red state. I think that Senator Jones is going to have a hard time surviving, just given the fact that the state votes so overwhelmingly Republican, but more importantly, because President Trump's going to be on the ballot. Many of your members may know this, but Alabama has the highest rate of favorable ratings of the president of any state in the union. The next closest is Wyoming. But more importantly, Alabama has the highest rating of straight ticket voting of any state in the union. So with President Trump on the ballot, it really makes it hard for a Democrat to be successful on a statewide ballot. And the House delegation is going to have some significant changes. My little buddy Martha Roby's retiring. I hate it. She's been a wonderful member of the delegation, and I understand it completely. With small children and all, this is a tough way of life, and we're going to miss her. But that's going to be a big loss. She was well positioned on the Appropriations Committee, and she was a very capable member. My great friend Bradley Byrne, ran for the Senate, didn't work out. We're going to miss him. He's another member of the Armed Services Committee. He's on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee with me. And those are going to be two folks that we're going to miss, both experienced legislators. The two folks that are coming in, Jerry Carl and Barry Moore, I feel pretty confident are going to win their elections in November, mainly because they're just heavily Republican seats. I think one's R14 and one's R16. So it's very tough for a Democrat to win a seat like those. But both of those are going to be coming in knowing that if the census is not turning out well, it could be a short career for one or both of them if the legislature has to redraw districts, because I'm pretty confident the legislature is going to protect seniority when they redraw districts. It's the logical thing to do. It's what we did when I was in the legislature and we redrew districts. So the delegation is going to see some significant changes, and those are good. The most meaningful is going to be when Richard Shelby moves on, because he's been such a powerful player. Fortunately, on the House side, we're going to be well positioned with me as a senior member, and Robert Adderholt is a senior appropriator, and now Gary Palmer is in leadership, and that is going to help us.
Congressman, thank you very much. The next question is a two-part question. Our community and the entire state of Alabama, for that matter, is home to quite a few defense-related industries and installations. Given your positions on the Homeland Security and Defense Committees, what do you see as the biggest threat to national security right now, and how might they affect our defense industrial base and military missions? Also, what do you see as the biggest areas of opportunity for our country and for our state from a defense and homeland security perspective?
Great question. The biggest threat's the debt. It just is. We saw a dramatic decrease in defense spending under the last administration. Under this administration, we've seen that pump back up. We're spending $742 billion a year right now on defense. That's a big bump up from what we were doing under the Obama administration. But the fact is, we've been at war now for 2 decades, and we've worn out our equipment and our manpower. The Obama administration downsized the manpower, what we call in strength. The military, that's been increased back up to a healthier level. But the whole process of rebuilding the military is going to be an 8 to 10 year endeavor, and we're only 3 years into it. So we cannot see that defense dollar amount decrease and expect to achieve what we've got to achieve to maintain the industrial base that we have and get us positioned to compete with China in the future. And that's the big part. To get to the second part of the question, there are a lot of opportunities for us, but we've got to recognize that we're not going to fight wars in the future like we fought wars in the past. One of the primary examples of why we just changed to a space force is that we have become heavily dependent on space to fight and win wars, just like people have become heavily dependent on space in their daily lives and don't even realize it. How many things you do each day that interacts with a satellite. Well, the same thing's happened with the military, and that's why we separated the Space Force out of the Air Force to meet those challenges. But it's other things. AI is going to be a big part, artificial intelligence, of the way we fight wars in the future. Cybersecurity. I say all that to say we're going to have to get away from some of the legacy platforms that we've used to fight wars in the past and move to these others. And, you know, it's like a Baptist church. You try to change the hymnal or color the carpet, half the church wants to leave and start a new church. That's just human nature. And that's the problem we're running into with the changes we're going to have to make in our military. You know, I love my friends in the Air Force, but it's been a fighter pilot culture. And they can't adjust to the fact that we're moving away from piloted aircraft, fighter jets. That's a cultural thing that they're going to have to come to grips with sooner or later, but it's just a fact. So that's going to be the real opportunity, is if we seize the changes, embrace it, and restructure our military to meet these challenges in the future, we'll be fine. But if we continue to be just stubborn Baptists and don't want to change, then we're going to be regretting it in the future. But I think we'll embrace it. But Congress is going to have to change the way we think too. You know, one of the problems we have with the military now when it comes to making changes and being aggressive and ambitious is if you're a 1-star general, you'd like to be a 2-star general. If you're a 2-star, you'd like to be a 3-star, et cetera. So you don't want something bad to happen on your watch. So you're risk averse. And that's largely because Congress has been stomping on them every time they step out and try to do something new and it costs money and is unsuccessful. They get pounced on. Well, we need people to be more ambitious and adventurous and think outside the box and recognize that the way you learn to succeed is by failing. You don't go straight from being a infant watering on the floor to running. You have to try to get up a few times and you're going to fall down. You try to walk and you fall down. That's the way you learn. And that's the way we're going to have to recognize that we want to evolve from the military we are now to the military we need to be. Some folks are going to have to experiment and fail, and we need to understand and encourage that, not pounce on them, criticize them for it.
Congressman Rogers, thank you very much for that response. You are so correct. Failure is, of course, our absolute best teacher. That's where experience comes from, and that's ultimately where you develop wisdom. Without that, we don't have it, and we need that to guide us as we go forward into the future. So thank you very much. A couple of more questions here. What does the remainder of the year look like from a legislative standpoint? We know continued COVID relief remains a hot topic, but what about general appropriations and the fiscal year 21 funding?
Anybody tells you know the answer to that, they're lying. It is no telling. Again, we aren't there. That's the biggest problem. I was really pleased that on the House side, the appropriations bills came together much better than I never thought they'd get moved. I didn't like the way they looked, but at least they moved some appropriations bills. But I don't know that we'll see them reconciled with the Senate versions. And so I fear a CR, which is just the worst nightmare that we could have. A continuing resolution for people who don't know what that means. That just means you continue the current funding to another point in time when you should have gone to a new budgetary process. But nobody knows. I don't see a lot happening between now and the election simply because we aren't going to be there for 3 weeks. The NDAA was a pleasant surprise this year, the National Defense Authorization Act. Last year, it was a very partisan process, and that's unusual. You know, on the Armed Services Committee, we fuss a lot about a handful of things. Basically, of 100% of the issues we deal with, 5% are what we fuss about. The other 95%, we get along fine on. It's not a partisan committee. Now, we fuss about nuclear weapons. We fuss about Gitmo. We fuss about transgender and who's going to pay for that and things like that. Some missile defense issues we fuss about, but that's it. So we have always gone into the National Defense Authorization markup and had our vigorous debate over those handful of issues, and then almost unanimously vote for the final product out of committee. Usually there'll be one or two stragglers, but that's it. And we've always taken great pride in that we show the American military, we got you back. You know, we don't agree on a lot of stuff up here, but when it comes to military and supporting them, we agree on that. Well, last year, again, because of this Trump derangement syndrome, there was a lot of pressure put on Adam Smith, the new chairman of the Armed Services Committee, to go after the president on the border funding. And this wasn't Adam's desire. This was coming out of Speaker Pelosi's office. So they basically put language in the National Defense Authorization Act saying that you couldn't spend any money on the wall. And obviously no Republican could vote for that, given that was the president's number one issue. And in most of our districts, it's the number one issue people care about, or it was before the virus, securing the southwest border. So none of us could vote for it. And it just turned out to be a toxic process. And that's the first time in memory anybody could remember a partisan NDAA. Now, we cleaned it up, after it partisan on the House floor, but we went to conference, we cleaned it up and took all that trash out and ended up passing it. But the great news is this year, Adam Smith came to Mac Thornberry, the top Republican, and came to me and said, listen, I don't want that to happen again this year. I'm not going to let any of that those poison pills in this bill. I want to work with y'all, and I want us to have a bipartisan product. And that's exactly what happened. He instructed his staff to do that, and we had a very bipartisan bill come out that voted out of committee unanimously. Got it out of the House, looking very good. I mean, they put some silly things in there, but we'll strip them out in conference. So, if Nancy Pelosi wants to demonstrate to the country that she's accomplished something significant legislatively before the election, the NDAA is a perfect product. This will be the 59th straight year that we pass an NDAA. No other piece of legislation can claim that.
Congressman, thank you. This is our final question. How do you think COVID-19 has changed the actual institution of Congress? We see conversations about remote voting, virtual meetings. Will the way Congress conducts business change moving into the future?
I don't think so. This has been very unwelcome. The virtual meetings we can suffer, unless you're marking a bill up, you can have the testimony and do questions through this technology. That hadn't been so burdensome. But when you're actually legislating, when you're marking up bills that are going to make law, you need to be around each other. There are a lot of conversations we have around hearings and before and after hearings that are very impactful on what winds up in that legislation. And this, it's not remote voting. Remote voting is what we do in committee. I don't like it either. But this proxy voting is the term I was trying to think of. Never in the history of the country has proxy voting been allowed on the House floor. That's where you basically just give your voting card to another member and say, vote for me. That is dangerous. And we've had a lot of members on the Democrat side, none on the Republican doing that. We've had over 80 members on the Democrat side. The first day that they had that, and keep in mind, this was supposed to be for people who were aged or had health issues that were afraid to come on the House floor, and you can understand that. We could have made some other accommodations, but you can at least understand it. The first day they had over 70 Democrats just didn't want to come back to Washington, so they sent the cards up for somebody else. By that afternoon, because this was the last, the votes were going to end that day, we had 84 members, Democrats, voting, because a lot of them just wanted to catch the airplane, didn't want to miss their plane, so they gave their card to somebody else. That's not what proxy voting was touted to be for. So I can see that, and the Democrats pledged that once the pandemic was over, that rule change would go away. So to get back to your core question, I think everything that we were doing before is going to be the way we work in the future, just because that's what the legislative process needs. We need to be there in person and having that debate live and voting in person.
Congressman, I think you're right. I appreciate your leadership on that matter as well, and thank you for the answer to that question. This concludes our questions, and we'd like to now open it up to you, Congressman, and with any formal final comments you'd like to make before this group today.
Nothing, just, we're going to survive this. We're a dynamic, powerful country, and, I think that we're going to look a lot different. I don't think we're going to know what the long-term effect of this pandemic is on us economically for at least another year. But once we do, we'll find a way to come out of this. We had the Great Recession in 2008. Took a long time, but before this pandemic hit, we were firing on all 8 cylinders and doing great. This country is vibrant, and it's gonna be fine. But know this, that once we're out of this pandemic, there's going to be some tough decisions that have to be made and some tough times dealing with this debt. This is not an inconsequential issue, but we'll find a way. I'm optimistic. And again, I want to thank y'all for the privilege of allowing me to be your voice in Washington for the last 18 years. And I look forward to doing it for a little while longer if y'all let me.
Congressman, thank you so much again for being here today and making your time available for us. It's critically important that we hear from you at this time. And again, we thank you for your leadership. Very, very much appreciated on behalf of Alabama and the country. We couldn't thank you more, and thank you again for joining us. The Chamber looks forward to continuing to offer these kinds of programs to give you important updates and resources for our community. To stay abreast of upcoming events, please reference the Chamber events page at www.montgomerychamber.com/events. And make sure that you subscribe to the Chamber's newsletter and following the Chamber's social media accounts. Registration is now open for the next Eggs and Issues, which will feature Senator Doug Jones and will take place Wednesday, September 2nd. Please join us for that. Again, thank you so much for your participation today with our very first virtual Eggs and Issues. I want to thank Congressman Rogers again for being here and sharing his time with us and sharing his insight, and most importantly, sharing his leadership with our area. We appreciate you very much. With that, we are now closed and adjourned, and thank you again.